I'm delighted to welcome you to my talk about the mysteries of digital transformation. My name is Russ Lewis. You'll know me as the Agiliser. We're just going to cover three topics. It's why we need to transform, why large organizations in particular need to transform. And a lot of my experience comes from the banking sector, so very large, very traditional, long-established organizations, highly regulated. I'm going to talk about why that's so difficult to do. And then I really would like to save you an awful lot of wasted effort and time by telling you how to transition effectively and if anything, completely avoid this idea of transformation. So as Ruth says so beautifully in her slogan, work happens in brains. We hire people because we want their brains. We want the things that we do not understand that something that people can do, which is listen to a story, make a leap of, I get it. Yeah, that comprehension, that analytical leap, and then that other leap, which is, hey, I've got a great idea. Why don't we try doing this? So the two things that currently AI cannot do, which is understand a complex problem and innovate a new solution. Right? We don't know how to program machines to do that. So that's why we need people and brains, and we need them to collaborate. So that idea of brains working together is really key to what we do. And in this situation, the role of the manager is very much a nurturing role, creating the environment. It's like the farmer. The farmer's job is to create the environment for wheat to grow. And in the same way that a manager's role in the modern digital age is to create the environment where people can do their collaborative, innovative, problem solving and problem understanding work effectively. And they probably can't do that work themselves, certainly if it's technical. So the last time I did programming for real was the Transport for London contactless fares ticketing system, ticketless system, and that was 2014, not very long ago. Most of the tools that I used then are now out of date. It would take me, if I could still do it, it would take me 4 to 6 months to learn the new tools and the updates to the programming languages that have occurred since. So if you're a manager, if you've been a manager for 10 years, and senior managers, it's typical, you can't do the work that your staff are doing, right? You're completely reliant on them. You do not know better than they do. They are in the work. So your role is to use your position to create the environment for work to happen effectively. Before the digital age, before information workers, the industrial age and before, we employed our capital, which is a resource, big bank, big pile of money. Somebody would come up with a great idea, a hypothesis. I think it would be good if we made this product, I don't know, a car. You hire clever people to design the machines that you need to build the car. You build those machines. You then hire people to operate those machines. And that's the end of the product, and that's then handed over to the next department along, probably marketing, the admin, whose job is to go and create the demand for it, to create the customers for that product. And then once they've done that, it's the job of the sales department to sell it, and then obviously shipping will move it all out. Now in that kind of scenario, the role of the manager is different. The role of the manager is it's an oversight, and it's to make sure that the assets of the company are protected. And remember, the assets are the designs, the patents, the know-how, the materials that go into making the car, for instance. You don't want people stealing any of that. And you've also got this idea of accounting, cost accounting, whereby we actually increase our profits by reducing our cost of production. And you reduce your cost of production by having cheaper labour, getting more out of your labour, getting longer life out of your machinery, and so on. So this idea of sweating assets, or at least getting the most out of resources, is part of the role of the manager in the industrial age. And that's how organisations have been built. So if you're working with an organisation that is more than 20, 30 years old, it's probably structured according to those ideals. Division of labour, different functions, different departments, handoffs between them, and each, of course, being a management hierarchy in its own right. And within that, you manage with tools of control. So the hierarchy itself, who you reward, and we tend to, in hierarchies, we tend to reward individuals, and we have other controls that give us the sense of control, but it's a false assumption very often. So if we plan we're going to launch this new product in 2 years' time, that is built on the assumption that we can build it, that we can create it, that there won't be, a tsunami or a hurricane that disrupts the supply of a crucial part. Now, this concept of staying focused in the work, this has worked for a long, long time, and it rewarded everybody. Obviously, the whole industrial age did very, very well, kind of regardless of the way they treated their assets. So you have a few standout examples, Wedgwood, Rowntree, Cadbury. These sorts of people really cared about their workers and looked after them spiritually, as well as financially. But it didn't actually matter in the industrial age. It didn't really matter whether you did that or not. You were going to succeed if you could get a product out there and convince people to buy it. And focusing on that is really what we've carried forward into the 21st century. Is I focus on my stuff. I focus on my objectives, because that's how I'm going to get my rewards. Everybody else's stuff is just busyness. It's just the work around it. And if you're in banking, for instance, the regulator, that's just more stuff, and it's really irritating stuff. And you can't avoid doing it. And other executives, other managers, your peers, you don't actually want to let them down, so you do some of their stuff as well. And it's very easy to forget the customer. There's the customer. Actually, you haven't got time for them because there's so much stuff. You don't have time to think about the customer. And all of that is fine until your customers go somewhere else, because you haven't been paying attention to them, and off they go. They've gone somewhere else. And excuse me. Certainly if I look at banking, the fintechs that have come up, the financial services, technical digital natives, they are starting up new organizations that can build products and get features out in days, not in months, not in years. And that's a lot like, that's not a competitor, that's competing with a superpower. We don't know how to compete with that, is the truth. So we've got very smart leaders at the top of these banking organizations. They really understand exactly what's going on. They recognize the need to change. But people underneath do not know how to do that. They've never experienced it. And remember, managers learn managing through experience. They've been managed, they've had some training, and they learn from each other, and they learn just by doing it. So lots of experiential learning. And now we're saying we need to change, we need to do things differently. We hire coaches and scrum masters and so on at the team level to tell teams how to behave differently. And if we're talking technical, then the Agile manifesto or the Agile movement was all about software development. So actually it's quite easy to train, to show a development team how to behave in an Agile way. And then that leaves the people in the middle, They're not frozen. I don't like the term the frozen middle. This is our managers who are saying, our primary role is to protect the organization here. We look after the organization, and we don't have better information yet as to how to operate the organization. So we can't do anything. Yes, we want to change. We'd very much like to. We see that the guys at the bottom are doing things differently and it's working, but nobody's told us how we transition to a more agile way of working. And that's really my mission, is to help and support managers understand and discover how they change the way that they work in transition. Okay, it's the role of the manager. What is the role of the manager? And it will be different in every single context. So there is no off-the-shelf solution. There's no book that says, right, this is what the manager looks like. But I can tell you this is what I have discovered by doing this. I'm almost certain that this is true. It's like looking at it with a different lens. Once you see things differently through a different set of lenses, you can never go back. And you've got a choice of allegory here. You can take Plato's allegory of the cave, which the prisoner, they lived inside of the cave. They were shown these pictures of two-dimensional scary animals, and they lived in fear. And then one of the prisoners escapes, I guess, and sees the outside world, and he sees in 3 dimensions, and he sees reality is different. There's this extra, it's different, and he's really quite excited. And he goes back in and tells the people, and they go, oh no, you mustn't go out there, it's dangerous. He said, but I've seen it. And they go, you're mad, you're crazy. And of course, he feels empathy with his colleagues, with his ex-colleagues, but once he's seen that truth, he can't go back, so he has to leave. And it's the same story. The Matrix is the same story. It's the red pill or the blue pill. Once you've taken the red pill, once you've seen this additional dimension, you can never go back. And that's what the agile thing is about. People talk about, does he get it? Or do you have the agile mindset? And that's really why, it's once you see things like this, once you see things in this way, it's very hard, it's impossible to go back. And personally, I work with a lot of managers, and I think that managers are 80% there. It's not all managers, all traditional ways of managing, all structured hierarchies are wrong. I really don't think that. I think it's 80% right, and I think we're talking about an extra, 5-10% that is the top up. Because once you see like this, then you're able to choose. You're able to say, right, is it right to stay in the work, do the work because that's what's needed? It's a lot of hard work here. Or are you saying, this is something new. I need to use a different approach, a different tool or technique. So that's what I'm going to give you, is that different technique. So we've got doing the work, we've got in the work. That's going to be your 80% of what you do. Not going to change. But there's going to be times when you need to learn some theory. You're going to have to go outside and say, how do other people do this? Now, if you're in tech, Google is a very good resource because they share all of their stuff. They just literally put it out there on their websites for free. So Google did some great research about psychological safety, about managing. It's called Project Aristotle. Go look it up. It's called RE Work, re.work, Project Aristotle. you want to be able to take this idea that's come through psychology and cognition, which is about reflection. We are able to integrate our learning and develop knowledge through reflection. Okay, and I'll explain the process for that in just 1 second. Now, if we apply that to our work context, we start to see that there's a technique here whereby if we start to deliver stuff to the customer and then measure the results of it, we've built a feedback mechanism, basic feedback mechanism. And theory tells us that we can use that feedback mechanism as a way of managing the risks of doing the wrong work. So we do a little bit of work, measure the results, and test what the impact was. Is it the right impact? Is this where we want to go? Does this make us want to change to a different direction? Do we need to stop this? Do we need to keep doing a bit more of this? So we start to build our first feedback loop right in there. And you'd be surprised how much work is done in organizations where there is no measure of impact. There's not even a description, a clear description of the outcomes required of the work. And in lean ideas, in the lean thinking, that all becomes waste. So if we want to be more effective, we start to think about eliminating waste. So, there's our first thing. We're applying this little bit of theory and we're able to measure the work that we do. We're reflecting back on the work that we're doing and asking ourselves, is it effective? We might be able to look at the regulator's demands of us and go, actually, what the regulator's trying to do is to protect the customer. So in a way, if we satisfy the regulator, we're satisfying the customer. And our attitude to the regulator may well change. And if we start to get good at implementing changes that the regulator wants or is thinking about, to start anticipating compliance, then we become a super provider, right? We're ahead of the game. Now our cost of change has gone right down. The regulator likes us because we're right up there, and we're doing well for the customers. So we start to win, and we might also regard the stuff that other departments and other functions and executives are demanding of us. We might start to be able to measure that or assess that in different ways. Maybe we can look at that as a whole and say, yeah, great, you're asking for this piece of work and we can see that it's important for you, but is it important for the whole, right? Is it good for the whole organization? And we might then be able to say, yeah, this is strategically important, so we will stop doing some of our work to make way for the work that you need. We understand that. So there you've got the kind of the collaboration between the different functions in the organization. Again, certainly in IT, people talk about the chasm between IT and the business or the product, But that's because our organisation isn't built for that collaboration. So we're starting to fix the collaboration gaps here. And overall, this becomes a process of learning. We're learning about the work that we're doing. So this idea of examining the work, bringing in external theory and reflecting on what we are doing in our context, because remember, everyone's context is different. What we're then doing is learning. So in practice, what does this mean? It's as simple as this. It's every week, once a week, we set aside 30 minutes, 45 minutes, probably no more than an hour, never more than an hour, and we look at the numbers. How many deliveries did we make? How many of those were defective? How happy were the people internally? How many customer complaints did we receive? Whatever matters to you, and we can talk a little bit later about measuring what matters. We measure it and we look objectively at that data because it's just data. This is our pure information, and when I say we, I'm talking teams and management, right? You look at the same data the same way together. It's really, really important that there isn't management information and worker information. You've got to be looking at the same things, because if it matters to everyone in the organisation. We spend a little bit of time to say, what are we going to do next? And it's just an experiment. Hey, I think it'd be really great if 2 managers work together the whole week, pair working. Yeah, we know about pair programming, so let's try pair managing. We're just going to try it, right? Or I read this great thing about, feedback mechanisms or retrospectives. Whatever it is, I'd like to try it. Can we try it? So here we're using the group, and again, remember, management and workers, you're a group. You're using your creativity, your wisdom, your individualism, your curiosity to introduce an idea about something that you'd like to try. And because it's an experiment, there's no cost involved, there's no danger of getting it wrong or having to be right. It's just an experiment. And then you reflect. What happened from last week's experiment? Well, last week we tried mob programming, and actually it was really great fun, but we discovered that 12 people was a bit too big for a mob. Okay, what are we going to do this week? Let's try 2 mobs of 6. Great. Remember, it's just a week. And this process is called learning. Okay? So be aware that no organisation is in the business of learning, but be aware that the things that you're going to do will result in learning. I suppose we could say that learning is the wonderful byproduct of this type of activity. So, some takeaway things for you to consider. First of all, transition, not transformation. So transition is what we can hope to do. It's the little steps of getting somewhere that we would like to get, but we don't know how we're going to get there or what it's going to look like. So forget transformation. You're never going to be transformed. You're always going to be on your way to a better, more effective place. And that will never stop. So that's an ongoing journey. And this idea of transition makes it a little bit safer, and it's actually more realistic. So be serious about learning, because you're in the knowledge industry. So you do need to be good at learning and adapting and picking up skills. And the way that we do that, and we know this from plenty of research, is stepping out of the work for theory and reflection. And to legitimize that, or to normalize that, it is mandatory for the people at the top, so top of each little hierarchy, you must lead that learning. And that's not, I'm going to kick off the first session and then I'm too busy. It is, you have a learning to do yourself. And you need to stick with it, because the moment that you stop learning, your organization stops learning. And a great place to start this learning bit is is writing down and agreeing outcomes before starting any work. In the Agile, or actually in extreme programming, this comes from, there's the idea of a user story. And it takes the form, this will be done when, and we define the acceptance criteria for this piece of work being complete. It's all about outcomes. It's not about how you're going to do it. It's actually about, why is this important and what is it? So I'd urge you to start there. That's a great place to start. Just start by defining outcomes. And then this idea of safety. This is a safety first. Everything is an experiment. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work. It's fine, because it's only running for a short time. But the rules for an experiment are, what is the hypothesis? What is it that you think is going to happen? So I think that if managers work together in pairs, I think that they will be better informed about what each other is going to do. I think they will enjoy it more, and I think we will have more joined up management. Okay, so that's my hypothesis, and I'm making this up as I talk. How am I going to measure that? Well, I'm going to measure it by, I'm just going to take a poll, just going to ask managers what their experience was and the people that they manage, how it was for them. So 2 very simple polls. Another one, another experiment. I think if we start delivering product every week, if we show where we are every week to our customers instead of waiting months until it's ready, I think we'll get valuable feedback. Okay? How will we measure that? Literally, you measure it by asking your team, was the meeting that you just had with your customers, was the feedback they gave you valuable or not? Did it make you do anything different? All right? And remember, you only do this for a week, and if it doesn't work, change it up or drop it. And always, always share what happened at the end. It certainly comes back into the improvement meeting, and even better if you add it to an internal blog or a knowledge base. Measure what matters to the final customer. Now this is hard. An awful lot of the organizations that I work with, they do not have a direct interface with the customer. They're not building websites or fancy things or delivering to the end customer. They're somewhere in the middle. They're part of the enabling of the customer. So let me give you an example, a payments system in banking. So I worked at Lloyd's Banking Group, and I worked in the payments, the domestic payments. We built and ran the systems that execute faster payments. So if you do an internet transfer, payment online, it goes through faster payments. So faster payments is a payments organization. Lloyd's is a member. There's a few members. And then all of the smaller banking and agency organizations around it use, for instance, Lloyd's to process their payments. But remember, payment has got a payer and a payee. So at least one of those parties will not be Lloyd's itself. And yet the faster payments team is processing. Our work was all about processing payments. So the sort of things that we were measuring was uptime, because the scheme itself measured uptime. How stable and how available is your service? We measured things like mean time to recovery. If something did go down, how long did it take to go back up? Now, they're actually valid measures, and certainly for the technical team, they're valid measures, but they don't really matter to the customer. And when we thought about this, and we did some investigations with customers, what do customers really matter? What do they care about? I want my money to arrive, right? So the payment gets made. And if it doesn't, I want to be told, and I want to be told exactly what's happening, no matter how good or bad it is. Okay? So those measures become quite different. So we're now starting to measure the number of payments that are made successfully, the number of payments that are currently missing, and the number of customers that have been told, exactly where their payment is and what the recovery plan is, and so on. So you have to design these measures accordingly. Or lose your customers. Targets. So if you come from a sales background, you're probably used to this idea of setting targets and believing that salespeople need targets to work. And that may or may not be true, but I would ask you to consider this. Make sure that your targets are set on the things that you control, not the outcomes. And if you're on the telephone and you're making appointments, You control the number of phone calls you make. You don't control the number of appointments that people want. So targets need to be based around things that you control. Otherwise, it's merely an aspiration. It's a long-term goal or an ambition. And this is difficult for people. I know this is difficult. You do not control your revenue. You really don't. You don't control that any more than you control, the country's interest rates. These are things that happen. You may be able to do stuff that influences it, in which case measure the activity that's going to influence it, because that you do control. For leaders, ambiguity and uncertainty is the challenge. Our whole way of building and managing organizations comes from the belief that we control and we predict and we're certain. Indeed our schooling system tends to not teach us how to deal with ambiguity. So just start to realize and see where ambiguity is problematic for you, and then maybe coaching can be a way to explore that. But actually, just the act of learning is a great way to help you get accustomed to this ambiguity. And focus your energy on something. Find something that you're going to champion and you're just going to bang on about. I want to know everything I can possibly know about my customers, or I want to know, I want everything that we do to be of the best possible quality. So quality in everything. Whatever it is, find something to champion. In terms of day-to-day management, there's this concept of flow. The things that increase flow are getting rid of delays. And one of the delays that happens a lot, and you won't realize this until you start examining it, comes from this command and control thinking. We stop, we wait for something to happen, we wait to get permission, we wait for authorization. Okay, so even if you start to map out, what is the value flow? How does work or product go from beginning into customer? How does it get there? And just start to look at that as a process and say, where are people waiting for hierarchical permission, right? Where's authorization required? And as you start to measure that, you'll start to see that there's a lot of approval. There can be a lot of approval. We did one where we found that there was 130 people at one approval stage, right? So we just got rid of them all, just took them all off. It made no difference. So see where people are waiting for decisions and try and move those decisions down to the people that are doing the work. And then shaping the work. Remember, the shape of the organization, the improvement to the structure and the ways of working. Managers are there to authorize those ideas. You're not close enough to the work to understand what they are. So the suggestions and the reasons will come from workers. And it's important that workers are able to explain that. So you have to listen. And then your job as a manager really is to go, I think that's a good idea, let's run an experiment. So try and authorize. The recipe for disaster really is for management to say, we're going to restructure and it's going to be like this because I read about it, I read this works in. It doesn't. You need the people that are doing the work because they understand the context, right? Because they're doing the work in your organization. So they know how to improve it. They know what's in the way. And then this one, which could be really a course on its own, I think it is. I think it's a 3-day course, is once you're tracking performance, once you're measuring what matters, it's really important to understand, and it's just it's really easy once you know this. There's a range in which any system will vary normally, and it's so important that you let that variation happen without interfering, because it's fine, it's a stable system. So you've got to know, and I've made these dotted lines, you've got to know where these boundaries of normal variation sit, so that when something happens that's beyond that, then you as a manager lead the, right, what's happened here? Let's go and look at that. And you all go and look at that, managers and workers together, and you try and understand why there's been this variation. And it's always external. So the variation will be an external effect that is impacted. And you do need then to respond potentially with a change to the system. But it's really important that when the performance is within the expected bounds, it's really important that you leave it alone. And I suppose that brings us to the biggest picture of all, which is really understanding that management shape the system of work. They form the system of work, sometimes deliberately and sometimes explicitly. So this is based on management beliefs. You will have a hypothesis and you will design the system or adjust the system or hire accordingly. That in itself is an experiment, because that system of work will then produce results which you can measure as performance. You do not control performance directly. And this idea that it's the system that you control and the system that performs, this is a shift in thinking. But the performance of that system is really the result of your experiment. And that's where the learning occurs. Chris Agiliser calls it double loop learning. So you've got these two loops going on and you're learning through it. So understand that as a manager, as a member of the management or leadership team, remember that what you're doing is influencing, changing, wielding the forces that affect the system of work. And then the system of work, that's its people, its processes, its physical locations, all of that, that then determines the performance of the system. So you measure the performance, right? And you understand that that will give you information that will help you to improve the system. So, following up, I've got some handouts for you. The slides that follow will be distributed. You've got some measures to consider, measures that matter. You've got references. Most of the slides have one or more references. I've got some reading. Most of it's fairly light. There's nothing terribly heavy weight, nothing too academic, but everything that I've covered is academically supported. Please contact me if you want to have an initial discussion about agilizing your organization or yourself. Agilizing yourself, always confidential. First session, of course, is just a lovely conversation which I would look forward to having. Let's open up for questions.